Good evening, everybody. There's an interesting and confusing phenomena that goes on in people's experience. On the one hand, there is direct experience spontaneously occurring in consciousness. And on the other hand, there is a strange property of imagination, which also occurs within consciousness. The experience of most people consists of a hodgepodge of direct experience and imagination occurring simultaneously. The problem is, most people are unaware of this and are unskilled at discriminating between what their direct experience is and their imaginary interpretations of it, what they hold it to be, the context that they put it in, and various other abstractions which exist only in their imagination. But if you are doing this and you are unable to discriminate between your direct experience and your imagined interpretations of what that experience is, this could be a very confusing state of affairs. Direct experience is unimaginable. It's literally unimaginable. It cannot be accurately imagined. By its very nature, it is strange, it is non-linear, it is irrational, it is inconceivable, it is illogical, it does not make any sense, it does not conform to any logic, rationality, or explanation conceivable. Imagination, on the other hand, tends to be more or less logical, more or less explanatory, more or less categorical, and so on. So imagination is always a stepping down in quality from direct experience. Direct experience is more than what is imagined. Direct experience is fuller, more open, more just a whole different order of magnitude of qualities of open-endedness. And what is imagined in interpretation is small, is limited, is partial. And this imagination is what all of our spiritual problems is constructed of, are constructed of, problems. We define ourselves, we define our lives, we define our circumstances, we define our environment, we define our world, we define what we think is going on in all of this. And that definition gives us problems because things don't line up. We can't figure out how to make things work. And, most fundamentally, that definition is completely wrong, completely in error, completely inaccurate. And so we basically define all of our problems into existence by defining ourselves wrong, by defining our lives wrong, by defining our circumstances, our embodiment, everything about what we are. We define it wrong, we define it inaccurately, and we define it problematically. It turns out that in actuality, there are no problems. There are no shortcomings. There are no incompletenesses. There is no lack. There is no partiality. There is no limitation whatsoever. So, to the extent that anyone feels any of these qualities, they are being imagined into existence solely in their imagination and have no actual existence. So the solution to these apparent problems is simply to discover that they don't exist. You don't need to come up with all sorts of elaborate solutions and strategies and address these problems. I've got to solve this. What am I going to do? How am I going to make sense of this? Well, you don't need to. You just need to see that the problems are non-existent. And the easiest way to do that is to see what direct experience is. Direct experience is, the qualities of direct experience are very clear. Direct experience is inconceivable. If you can define at all any quality or condition or action or entity whatsoever, that's a sure sign that it's imaginary. It's that simple. All direct experience is essentially mysterious. It's very present, it's very clear, but you cannot get to the bottom of what it is. You cannot define it, you cannot encapsulate it, you cannot imagine it, you cannot have the last word on it. Now, in spirituality, it's very fashionable and I should say lucrative to be able to come up with a nice simple technique. You know, you get a nice technique, transcendental meditation, or, you know, empowerment, or, you know, saying the magic mantra, or, you know, this particular meditation technique, or this particular style of movement, or this particular whatever. And it's very attractive. Oh, you know, all my problems will be solved if I just learn this one technique and just do it. Wouldn't that be nice? The problem is, it just doesn't work that way. Reality is always present. Reality is always revealing itself. Reality is always presenting itself within everyone's experience. There is no one whatsoever alive who is not experiencing reality all the time. So the problem is not experiencing reality. The problem is noticing it. The problem is appreciating it. The problem is not undervaluing it in favor of our fantastic interpretations of it, which we imagine into existence. And as I've been talking about, we typically unaware that we're doing so. We think it's actually the case. So it's wonderful as any of these spiritual techniques may be. You know, there's all sorts of techniques, and they will definitely shift your experience. You know, you'll get a little buzz, you'll get a little disorientation, you'll get a little bliss, you'll get a little whatever. You know, and that's fun. It's like going to Disneyland or something, but it's not going to address the fundamental problem. And the fundamental problem, it does not need a technique. You know, noticing direct experience does not need a technique because it's always happening. And it's not special. This normalcy is made of reality. This right here is the presence of reality. Pure and simple. There's no higher reality, deeper reality, more spiritual reality, you know, more transcendental reality. What's happening right here is absolutely transcendental. Literally. It's completely infinite. In the literal, actual, concrete sense of that. There ain't nothing better than just what's here right now. What normalcy is made of is what all the fuss is about, is what all of, you know, the divine, the spiritual, you know, the Dharmakaya, the Atman, all of these wonderful, you know, carrots on a string that lie at the end of the fabled spiritual yellow brick road. What they all refer to is what is present right here, right now. So the challenge is not to get to that. The challenge is not to achieve that. The challenge is simply to notice it, to appreciate it, to stop being confused by your misinterpretations of it. As I said, there are some pretty easy tricks to distinguish reality. Reality is undefinable. You can't say what it is. Anything you can say for sure what it is or how it is, it's a sure sign that you're imagining it. If you say, oh, so-and-so is such and so I don't like it. Anything you can like or not like is imaginary. Reality is too weird, it's too open-ended to even know what it is, let alone to be able to form an opinion about it. You have to think you know what something is to have an opinion about it. How can you know if you like or don't like someone you haven't met? You have to meet them, and then having met them, you have to think something about them. You have to think, oh, this person is too XYZ, so I don't like them. But XYZ, if you can say it, it means it's imaginary. If you can say it, if you can verbalize it, if you can put it into a word, if you can put it into a sentence, that is a sure symptom of fantasy, of delusion, of unreality. We all know this with people. You can know someone. People have a flavor, and you know it. Just like when you taste, asparagus, you can recognize it. Asparagus has a presence. But if I ask you, what does asparagus taste like? Well, you're stymied. Unless you start coming up with bullshit. Well, it's kind of a little salty and a little, sort of pungent, and it's like, yeah, but that's not asparagus. Those words aren't asparagus, and I can sit and think about those words all day long, and if I'd never tasted asparagus, I wouldn't know what it tasted like. And the same with people. People have a flavor, but that flavor is actual, and since it's actual, it's undefinable. You can't get to the bottom of it. You can't delineate. You can't say for sure exactly what it is, even though it is exactly what it is. But that's the tricky nature of reality. That's the slippery nature of it. It is what it is, but what that is infinite, is nonlinear, is irrational, makes no sense. It cannot be encapsulated in an idea, in a concept, in an explanation, in an abstraction. So in short, anything you can think you know anything about with any degree of certainty at all, it's a sure sign that it's imaginary, it's fantasy, it's delusion. And fantasy is fine, imagination is fine. The problem, it's not like we need to stop imagining, it's not like imagination is evil and we need to purge ourselves of all imagination and walk around like logical zombies or something. But you need to be able to notice that imagination is imagination, and that imagination is real imagination. So my fantasies about things are real fantasies. Fantasy is real, but fantasy is real fantasy. Okay? Big difference between a real fantasy and a real present. So, your field of vision is present in your experience. That's not a fantasy. And the proof of that is you can't say what it is. How does vision happen? How does light appear in consciousness? Anybody? It's, I don't know. Here it is. It's quite clear and very obvious, but you just be with it for a moment and it becomes quite clear that, wow, this is really interesting, subtle, very explicit, very clear, very present. It's normal, it's actual, it's obvious. But then you look at what it is that is obvious, and all of a sudden, whoo, it's very interesting. You can sit with, well, what is vision? What is the experience of vision? And right away you find yourself going deeper and deeper and deeper into it with no bottom in sight. There ain't no bottom. That's a question you can mull over to the end of time, and you're never going to get to the end of it. Presence of sound, same thing. Presence of thought, same thing. What's thought? It's this present experience, right? I mean, thoughts are present. I'm thinking. Thinking is happening in consciousness. Okay, fine. What is it? How does it work? What's it made of? Where is it happening? How is it happening? You all those questions just sort of go. They don't have anywhere to land. They don't have anywhere to rest. There's no bottom to that inquiry. There's no. Oh, I know the answer to that one. It's it happens like this. It's not like that, is it? It's weird. It's subtle. It's nonlinear. It's irrational. It's clear and obvious. It's very present. It's undeniable. But you can't say what it is. You can't get to the bottom of it. You can't sort it out. And the same with all the five senses. The presence of direct experience, the presence of any experience whatsoever is real. Even if it's not classifiable in the five senses. And of course, classifying as the five senses turns out to be imaginary. Because, the proof of that is you can put it in words. Oh, this is sight, this is not hearing. So, since you can put that in words, that means it's an imaginary distinction. What's the actual difference between sight and hearing and your experience? Well, it's kind of slippery, isn't it? It's kind of weird. It's kind of hard to pin down. And all of a sudden, you're outside of the realm of words. You're beyond what words and ideas and concepts can address with any accuracy. And these are the symptoms of reality. These are the symptoms of genuine experience. Experience is real. But experience is not what you think it is. Experience is not what you can think it is. Experience cannot be thought accurately. It cannot be imagined accurately. It is what it is, and what that is inconceivable. It's an inconceivability that happens to be present and obvious and explicit, which makes it very, very interesting. Because here is the actual accessible presence of bottomlessness, of inconceivability, of an endless conundrum, of an endless koan that is sitting right smack in your face, so to speak, always. You go to sleep and it's the same mystery. You start dreaming, it's the same mystery. You wake up, it's the same mystery. Well, here's experience. What is it? Well, it's this. Yeah, it's this. Okay. And when you begin to notice this, you can stop finding yourself under the sway of all these interpretations and concepts and fantasies, storylines, designations. And not surprisingly, you find yourself much less under the sway of pain, suffering, incompleteness, frustration, and Weltschmerz. So anyway, it's something to ponder. We can have a chat now. If you'd like to say anything, if you wouldn't mind speaking into the microphone, so people that are following along on the internet will be able to hear what you have to say. And otherwise, if you're just sitting here, please enjoy this astounding presence that is here, obviously, tantalizingly, exquisitely detailed and beautiful. And you can endlessly investigate this, and you will never be dissatisfied with the depth of what is here.
Hi, Peter. Wonderful to see you again. Haven't been up here in almost a year. So I may sound like a broken record, but it just blows me away every time In your meeting, the world falls away. Everything you're saying about the miraculous quality of existence and how it is not, it is infinity itself. It's all somewhat obvious.
Mm-hmm.
But the course of my daily life, I mean, it's that's not my experience. It's confusion, desire, you name it. It's everything but that.
Mm-hmm.
And I attempted a retreat coming up on 10 years ago, and I in my mind I figured, well, the afflictions are very deep. At least in my case, I know what I had to grapple with from years of living with myself, and I thought that's a lifetime project. I didn't want to leave retreat. I had to because they doubled the cabin rate at the retreat center where I was staying, so that was the end of my retreat. And I've not been able to re-enter any similar situation. So out in the world, and my life is pretty, I'm on disability. I don't have a lot of pressures on me. I don't have a family. But nonetheless, I suffer, and my mind takes me places that I know are not in the spirit of the highest truth. And, I've talked about this before with you. Some would say, well, I need to do years of purification practice and, all of that. And I tend to believe that, yet I come here, at least in this moment, life is very clear and open. So it's just, I guess more than anything, I don't know that I have no idea of how it works, but just, being in the company of someone who understands things very deeply, it's the way that it gets communicated energetically is amazing. It's one of the true miraculous things that I've always observed.
Well, good. That's nice. It's easy. It's much easier than years of retreat, isn't it?
Well, once I leave, not necessarily once I leave, but I know that in time, it's like a piece of paper that will resume its folded position.
Mm-hmm.
Like it starts to open, or some image like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what you get drawn to, what you get sucked into with desires, with frustrations, with investment, with all of these things, exists in the habit of your imagination, your habitual way of defining things. And again, what you may notice in a situation like this is the context within which imagination exists, which is not imaginary, which is undefinable, and which, by virtue of being undefinable, is not partial. It's a fullness, it's a wholeness, it's a completeness, it's inherently unentangled. So it's always available, it's always accessible, and we have the, most of us have the arguable misfortune of keeping going back to our fantasy life, going back to our stories, going back to our interpretations, which serve to torment us. They basically just serve to torment us. Like an addiction, like a junkie or something who just keeps, I shouldn't be drinking, but there's a bar and, well, what the hell, one more won't hurt, right? And, and in a certain sense that's true, one more won't hurt. But if you find yourself in a situation where it is hurting and it feels like suffering, then it behooves you to investigate. And the simplest investigation is to notice that everything that you get invested in is a story that exists in your imagination. And as such, it doesn't have any teeth. It's like following along on a soap opera in TV. You know, you're just, oh my God, this is terrible. Oh no, you know, these people are getting divorced, and this woman is cheating on her husband, and this is terrible. You know, God, how can this happen? But it's just a story. So it may be terrible. It may be a terrible story, but the operative word there is story. It's a terrible story. And likewise, all of the challenges and trials and tribulations of our lives are such by virtue of the fact that they're a story. You know, I have this terrible story about myself that I'm a failure. I have this terrible story about myself that I'm a jerk. You know, I have this terrible story about myself that I'm, you know, invested in all sorts of things and I shouldn't be. You know, and all of this. And even if that's true, the fact that it is a story kind of takes the teeth out of it. You know, if you can just see that what torments us is our stories, they may be tormenting stories. It's not a matter that they don't exist. We may be in the habit of telling ourselves these horrible stories. Okay, fine, but they're still the stories, and we're telling ourselves the stories where? In the presence of this fullness, this full field of spontaneously appearing radiance that constitutes the real-time fact of this transcendental experience.
Peter, let me just ask you, I have to wonder, in the original Dzogchen teachings, did they have the whole thing about developing samadhi and all of that, or was it more like what you're communicating, a direct invitation to experiencing reality?
Yeah. The essence of Dzogchen is noticing that reality is intrinsically a transcendental radiance and nothing else whatsoever. And everything is made of this transcendental radiance. So our afflictions are made of light. You know, our individuality is made of light. Our separation is made of light. Our pain is made of light. Our pleasure is made of light. Since everything's made of light, when you see that, it stops being a problem. It's like discovering that it's a movie or discovering that it's a dream. You know, in a dream you can have all sorts of horrible events going on. But if you go lucid in the dream, you get, oh, but this is just made of dream. Sure, a monster's chasing me. You know, sure, everyone hates me and nobody loves me and life sucks. But I'm just dreaming. It's just made of dream. So it's not that the events are not depicting themselves in a way that implies suffering, but the actual substance that all of these supposed events are made of gives a lie to the story, because the actual substance of it is not suffering. You can't build suffering out of blissful radiance. The building blocks just don't work. You know, you can't build darkness out of light. You can't take a bunch of bricks made of light and build something that's dark. It's just not going to work. And the very essence of Dzogchen is discovering that the substance of reality itself, which is experience, the substance of experience is a transcendental, essentially divine or miraculous radiance. You know, the Dharmakaya is intrinsically shines, and that shining is intrinsically pure and perfect. Cannot be otherwise. You can't build imperfection out of a substance which is perfect. You can't take bricks of perfection and build imperfection out of them. It just doesn't translate.
So the notion of working with the relative mind or the affliction, so if one has, for example, one has anger, meditating on loving kindness, if one has desire, meditating on the repulsiveness of the body and the fact that it will get old and sick and going to a cemetery, that type of thing. That seems to be a different level from what you're pointing out to, which is more the raw stuff of reality.
Yes, exactly so. Those are more tantric approaches. Dzogchen undercuts all problems by discovering that they don't exist. They literally don't exist. Because the only thing that does exist is, what they call metaphorically the three kayas, this transcendental radiance, which sounds very glorious and amazing, but is nothing other than this present experience that is concretely happening right here, right now. So when you see that, it doesn't make the energies that are present go away, but it casts them in a vastly different context, where they are transcendental, groundless, intrinsically pure, radiant energies, which are groundless. They're not based in anything. It's like a movie shining forth. So you can have a movie shining forth of monsters and devils and dragons and demons, but there's no dragons and demons and monsters there, because it's a movie, it's light. And so there's nothing threatening. It looks as if it might be threatening, and if you misinterpret it, there can seem to be a lot of problems with all these monsters and things. But when you get that, this is just patterns of light. Literally, it is nothing but patterns of light. It's like, God, it's a pretty tasteless movie. Why don't I go see a movie that isn't that monsters, see something a little nicer? Well, that's just a matter of taste. But fundamentally, the problem of the monsters and the devils is solved when you get that it's just a movie. It's just light. And that fundamental is not just conceptual. It completely, when you see that clearly, it completely rearranges your whole energy stance with regards to your experience. You see that your experience is essentially a pure radiance. It may be a weird pure radiance. It may be shaped very strangely. It may have very bizarre implications and nuances and eddies and vortices in it. But it's intrinsically a pure radiance. And how can you build problems out of pure radiance? Just how can you do it? It's a mismatch. It just can't work. And when you really see the fact of that, and you see the truth of that, not just theoretically, but, it's directly, the evidence of this is directly present. And so you have direct access. Your field of vision is light. When you see something, you're not seeing any objects. You're seeing a pattern of light. That's just a simple fact. So you see a child being raped and abused and tortured to death. This is terrible. It's a pattern of light you're seeing that looks as if it was that. If it was really that, it would be terrible. But since it's a pattern of light, it's just a bizarre pattern of light. And likewise, all the rest of your experience is essentially just patterns of light that are doing themselves. And if you don't want to look at it experientially, if you want to look at it more material-based, you can say, okay, clouds of quarks. How about clouds of quarks? So, this spoon is a cloud of quarks, or atoms, or, neutrinos, or whatever it is, say. Okay, so is this cup. So's this person, so's this floor, so's the child being raped and abused and tortured to death by an evil pervert. On the level of quarks, how do you tell the difference? It's like suppose you get a telescope and you look out into the night sky and see all these galaxies going around. The galaxies are just these clouds of little flashes of light, right? Suppose on some level of observation you could say, boy, that galaxy is a really good galaxy and that galaxy is evil. Because that galaxy is eating the other galaxy, and how could it do that? How malicious of it, or whatever, right? But it's a matter of your frame of reference of observation. Intrinsically, it's just a cloud of lights. Intrinsically, anything you can see is a cloud of quarks. So it's a cloud of quarks which is shaped as if it was such and such, and is interpretable as if it was such and such. And if it really was that might have implications. But it isn't. It isn't. It's a cloud of quarks. So you have to see. You're not qualified to hold a clear opinion about things unless you know exactly what it is. And it's impossible to know exactly what anything is, what this is, because it's all empty. And by empty means there's no final perspective on exactly what it is. You can never get to the bottom of the definition of exactly what anything is.
So the mind of a Buddha, whatever that is, but I'm just going to assume that it's a completely free mind that does not fixate on exactly what you were saying, does not
not fixate,
right,
and on any particular version of events. It doesn't hold anything to be anything fixed.
And the teachings that I'm not really well versed in, but I'm a little bit familiar. In Mahayana, they talk about. I've heard this discussed in different lectures or different texts. So the fully awakened mind it sees no inherent suffering. It sees everything as just patterns of energy and light and shadow and so forth, and at the same time can know that beings do experience that, so therefore takes the trouble to try and communicate. The whole notion of the arhat versus the bodhisattva. The arhat just abides in the unconditioned.
Yeah, but a lot of that, again, is more theorizing, because, again, communication and beings interpreting what other beings seeing, and then taking the trouble to communicate with them, and all of that is more interpretation. All of that is inscrutable and is just patterns of light too. So if it happens that a Buddha communicates with another being, the Buddha, the other being, and the communication are all inconceivable infinite light. So calling it that is oversimplifying it, and it itself, the actuality of that event transcends that description. That description may be viable, but it's not accurate, it's not complete, it doesn't capture it. And there's an important point here that I really want you to get, and this is that you already have that experience. You already have the experience of just patterned energy appearing as your experience. That's already the basis of your experience. This is not something that one needs to achieve. The Buddha experience, let's call it, of ungrasping experience, is the basic state of everyone's experience. So it's not something you need to achieve. It's not something you need to ramp up to. It's not something you need to learn how to do. It's something that you simply need to notice you already are doing, and then credit it, acknowledge it, appreciate the value of it, I'm experiencing all these patterns of light, and I'm also happen to be in the tendency of generating all of these ideas and fantasies about them that seem to get me caught up in them emotionally and blah, blah, blah. But you already are experiencing the patterns of light. The generation of the fantasies is more patterns of light. The getting caught up in it emotionally is more patterns of light. So it's just patterns of light. It literally is that, and you already know that. You're already experiencing that. So again, this is not something that you need to learn how to do or stop doing something in order to do that. It's simply a matter of noticing that is in fact the actual case already, right here, right now. So it's much, much easier. All of these spiritual theoretical traditions don't do us a lot of favors. They're not doing anyone a service by all these elaborations, because they oftentimes paint a picture of how difficult and bleak and challenging. God, I have to get rid of all these afflictions that I've accumulated over numberless incarnations, and it's blah blah blah, purification, accumulation of merit, blah blah. It's kind of a nice theory in a way, but it's very cumbersome. It implies, it's like, why would you even bother? It's like, oh, well, maybe in 100,000 lifetimes I'll be pure, and it's like, oh my God, does that sound pretty shitty or what? How about just seeing, discovering what is the case right here, right now, outside of theories, because all these Buddhist theories and other theories are fine, but there's lots of theories and they're all mutually contradictory. And you may have a history of accepting a certain theoretical basis as being more or less provisionally useful or not. But, you could go out and find some other theoretical basis which is completely different, which contradicts that, which other people also accept. How about just abandoning theory and just being really, really empirical? All I advocate is just simple practicality, empiricism. It's like, well, okay, so all my life, people have been telling me what this is. People have been telling me what I am. People have been telling me what's going on here. And everyone says something different. Everyone has a different story. The Buddhists say one thing, scientists say another thing, Christians say another thing, atheists say another thing, stupid people, of which this is probably the vast majority, say other things. And so there's this big hodgepodge of information about what's going on, and none of it agrees with itself, none of it's very clear, none of it's very useful. So how about you just scotch it all and reinvent the wheel? Just say, okay, I can figure this out myself. I don't need all these theories. I don't need all these Buddhas. I don't need Christ. I don't need the advice of dead people from the Far East thousands of years ago. How about, why don't I look at what's happening right here, right now, for myself, and just see if it's really that complicated? And what I'm here to say, by all means, you have to investigate this for yourself. But what I'm here to say is, it turns out it's not. It turns out it's quite simple. It turns out that all of our problems come from thinking our imagination matters. Just because you happen to think something or imagine something doesn't mean that it's important that you did so. So I imagine, I'm a shitty person, I'm a jerk, I use people, I'm emotionally manipulative, I'm clinging, I'm full of... It's like, okay, good, so I just thought all those things. They're just thoughts. Does it matter that I thought them? Did it change my field of vision to think those thoughts? Light is still appearing in consciousness. Now I think, I am a direct emanation of the Big Bang, of the great creative energy of reality itself. This is a direct manifestation of actuality, and that is doing me. I am that. I am this embodiment of actual truth, of actual energy, of actual being. Did that change my field of vision at all? Just more thoughts. It's more fantasy. Fantasy is just fantasy. It's just bullshit. It's spin doctoring. It's stories. And all this Buddhist philosophy, and for that matter, all other philosophies, are in that category. It's not that it's not that it's wrong or right. It's that it's irrelevant, because the simple fact is that reality is already complete. This moment is already happening.
And the fact that I'm even here to think about all this stuff is in and of itself mind-boggling, amazing.
Yeah, you're real.
Yeah,
you're real.
Yeah.
You're here. How did that happen? How's that happening? What is that?
Did it happen? That's right.
Now we can describe it and think about it and have stories, and is it good, is it bad, is it confusing, is it not confusing? But that's just more hot air. The fact is already a done deal. Right? You are here. Period. And everything comes with that. All of reality, the full field of experience, right? And this mind-boggling intelligence and consciousness that just you spontaneously have. You just have it. You didn't ask for it. You don't have to create it. You don't have to maintain it. It's just, in fact, you can't stop it, right? It's just bang. It just comes with. It's already happened. It's already a done deal. And that's pretty powerful. That's a pretty powerful, that leg up right there is like, okay, so let me cash in on that. So if that is the case, if I am here, if I am real, if I am this already happening, fully functional, inconceivable, whatever the hell it is, if that's already a done deal, then then I can just sort of sit back and look at it and say, wow, this is pretty amazing. And then I can start to categorize it outside of the context of various theories. I can just say, well, there's this sort of sensory experience, there's mental experience, there's various other subtle experiences that we don't even have language for. There's the power to interpret things, There's a seeming apparent profound interaction of various aspects of what seems to be appearing. I mean, there's all of these sort of aspects, and they're all question marks. They're all wow, because they all come with. And so here we are sitting in this amazement, in this amazingness, this mystery. We are deeply intelligent. We're vastly more intelligent than we give ourselves credit for. We can spontaneously and effortlessly look at these things, consider these things, think of these things, apprehend and explore these things, and all of that comes with, and that right there is the totality of spirituality. That's the totality of the spiritual path. And what's more, that's the totality of spiritual realization. Realization is not an endpoint. Realization is not getting to some finality where all of a sudden, oh, I did it. Everything stopped. I've solved the puzzle. I've balanced the equations. It's not like that. Realization is just, yeah, this is it. Is it final? I don't know. What does that mean? Does it stop when you say this is it? Well, it doesn't kind of seem to, but I don't know what stop means. Is it even going? Did it ever start? So stop and start are meaningless. Going is inconceivable. This whole thing is completely inconceivable. And here it is. That is the totality of realization. That is the totality of what is meant by Buddha mind. Just this simple presence, simple fact. And it's already happened. It's a fait accompli. And it has this incredible miraculous power to generate all sorts of hypothetical fantasies and thoughts and interpretations about what's going on here, none of which impedes or stops or infects in the tiniest bit the actual event. When you have an interpretation, it doesn't stop your seeing, it doesn't stop your hearing, it doesn't stop your feeling. So it's just another sense field. The field of imagination is just another sense field, and it has no limits. You can imagine anything. You can imagine heavens, you can imagine hells, you can imagine anything you want, and it's just imagination. It's not important. It's not actual. It doesn't have anything to do with anything. We have some questions online, I guess.
Peter, we have one question from the internet. Einstein famously stated that energy can be...
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time making out the words. Maybe if you hold the mic out a little bit.
Einstein famously stated that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. I was wondering what you think of that statement in terms of the possibility that our energies can't be destroyed after we die.
Well, it's a nice statement, but it begs the question, what exactly does creation mean? What does destruction mean? What does existence mean? And in what context? Is it relative to some non-existence? It's easy to have simplistic ideas of things get created and then things get destroyed. There's life and there's death, and death is the destruction or the loss of something. But all these notions are ideas, they're fantasies. When you go looking in real time, you can't define what creation is. What's creation? What exactly is creation? Can you find an actual instance of creation? Even transformation, even if you say, well, energy transforms from one state to another, that's an assertion, and you can observe it seemingly occurring, but you can't pin down what's actually occurring or how it's actually working. So, I have no problem with ideas like that, but they're just ideas. And in the face of this actuality, they're essentially meaningless. because you'd have to know what creation and destruction was to even consider that statement seriously, and that's an impossibility. You have to know what being is. Creation might mean coming into being, and destruction might mean going out of being. Okay, fine, but what is being? I am being. I can say that, but I sure as hell can't say what it is. And I can't say if it comes from anywhere or goes to anywhere. It does, it's easy to spin theories and ideas about that, but it's just more hot air.
Thank you.
And as far as, energy persisting after we die, is energy persisting while we're alive? I mean, instead of thinking about what happens at death, why not look at what's happening right here, right now, and notice the fact that there's no way to get a handle on that? I mean, are you alive now? What does that mean? What does that even mean? This is present. Sure, but you can't find a this that is present. You can't pin down what presence means, actually, even though it's obvious. It's clear that experience is present, but what exactly is this presence that's so clear? And you go looking for it, and it's like a mirage. It recedes. You can't nail it down. You can't get a handle on it. What is presence? I mean, it seems really simple. You ought to be able to answer that, right? It's obvious. It's in your face, so to speak. And yet, presence is, the union of consciousness with a sensation, let's say. What does that mean? What's consciousness? What's a sensation? What's a union? I mean, all of this stuff, you just start spinning bullshit and generating hot air when you start trying to elaborate on this stuff, because it's inconceivable. Presence is inconceivable. I mean, this is the cardinal fact about reality, is that it's inconceivable. So, even though it's self-evident, it's inconceivable. It's actuality is inconceivable. It's present, clearly, but presence itself is inconceivable. It is in consciousness. Consciousness is inconceivable. What the hell is consciousness? I mean, reality is, it's maddening when you try and approach it from within a normal human framework, because it's so self-evident, but there's no way you can get a handle on it, and that seems very strangely paradoxical and mad and confusing. But it's just simply the case. And once you get that is just the case, it's just how it happens to be, then it's much simpler. It's like, oh, okay. Reality is actual, specific, explicit, present, unblocked, and completely elusive. I mean, that's a strange set of qualities, and yet it clearly is the case. It's completely obvious, and yet you can't say what it is, you can't get a handle on it, you can't describe it, you can't define it, you can't get to the bottom of anything. You can't know what anything is, you can't know what you are, you can't know what the objects of your experience are, you can't know what consciousness is, you can't know what experiencing is and how it works. I mean, we all know these things very, very intimately. We all know our experience very intimately. 24/7, that's what we are. We're experts on our experience. But it doesn't do us any good, does it, in terms of getting a handle on it? Because reality has all these qualities of being so explicit, so obvious, so explicit, and completely elusive, completely undefinable, completely bottomless in terms of getting to the bottom of what anything actually is. So, in the face of that, here we have life. And there's the death over there, the big boogeyman of, what's going to happen when I die? Is there energy going to persist or not? I wonder. But hey, start just life. Okay, if this is life, start with that. So here's life. Is energy persisting now? Well, energy seems to be present. If I define energy as that which is present as experience, But when I start looking at that presence, all of a sudden it gets very weird and trippy, and I can't possibly get a handle on what it is. If I start looking at things like persistence, that gets completely dizzying. Shut that guy up. Anyway, you probably get the point, or not. In spirituality, we set ourselves these really difficult questions like, what's death? What happens after death? Why not make it easy? Why not just look at what's happening right here, right now? You can actually look at that, right? And it's going to be just as mystifying as looking at what happens after death, and ultimately a lot more rewarding because it's accessible. It's something you can actually look at. Look at this here. Here it is. Wow, what is it? It's, that's not just a frivolous question. It's a very, very interesting question. What is this? We're used to thinking, it's just, life, it's just experience. Just experience. This is endlessly fascinating. It's a riddle that you have all the answers. It's a puzzle you have all the answers to, all the pieces spread out on the table, quite clear, right here, completely accessible, and you still can't put the puzzle together. It's fascinating. It's just fascinating, this open-endedness. But make it easy on yourself. Just look at your experience right here, right now. That's all you need to do. That's the entirety of the spiritual path, right there. And that very looking is also the goal of the path. It's not like you need to look and then you're going to find something. Just the looking at this is what has always been happening. It's what's already happening. And when you see that, you'll see that it's what's always going to be happening. I mean, what are you going to be doing on your deathbed? Looking at your experience, right? What were you doing when you were being born? Looking at your experience. What are you doing now? Looking at your experience. I mean, that's the whole deal right there. There ain't nothing else.
I have a question. Yeah, so you answered a lot of the questions that I had already, but I wanted to bring it up a little bit. The pacemaker operation I had is almost this Friday will be 2 weeks since that happened. And I've been kind of recovering sort of more slowly than I would have liked, perhaps, but it hasn't been all that bad. But anyway, I went and I saw the assistants and all that at the cardiologist's office yesterday, and they say, well, things are looking pretty good and all that. Then I went to see my main doctor at another clinic because she doesn't know that much about this particular operation that I went through, but I saw her today. And then she's kind of looking through my chart, and she says, well, it says here that you also have some, you have this other problem, which it was leaky valves.
Always something.
Always something, that's the thing. And which means like the upper part of the heart the blood is not getting down to the lower part, so that could require horrible things like open heart surgery or something like that. Which I know nothing about anyway, but I guess I was a little...
I think the doctors want to get paid is what it's down to.
Well, I thought of
that. They make a lot for each one of these procedures,
Yeah, they have a lot of boat payments to make and all that. Yeah.
So you're sitting here, you walk, I saw you walk in the door, I saw you get a chai, you're sitting here, you're talking. It looks to me like your valves are probably working fair to middling.
Yeah, as well as I ever know, since I don't notice them anyway that much, or at all. And but I guess it bothers me a little bit that they told the other doctor about the thing didn't tell me about that, which seems sort of like, why? What? But even if so, maybe they decided to protect me from this horrible knowledge or something. But I don't know. Anyway, I did realize that I don't know what's going to happen about that anyway, or what it really means, the leaky valve situation. But
I mean, it's a perfect example. It's like, oh, your valves are leaking. Well, what does that mean? It's an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, it may have something to do with something that's happening, but you can't know what that is.
Right.
It's something about your heart. You don't know what your heart is. You don't know how it works. No one that's ever lived knows exactly what a heart is and how it works. Mm-hmm. And I will say that no one that ever will live will know exactly what a heart is and how it works. Yeah. Because it's mysterious.
Yeah.
And so all of these pundits and doctors and what all have their provisional descriptions that are part of their professional expertise, and they can slice and dice and they can do this and they can diagnose that and they can treat that, but they don't even know what's actually happening in any of that. They don't have 100% success rate. They don't have it. They're just empirics. They're just auto mechanics, and it's all ultimately mysterious. You're going to die. Mm-hmm. Everyone dies. You don't know exactly when or how. You don't know what that means even, except as a big abstraction. But here you are, you're alive with leaky valves and a pacemaker, and you don't know what that means. So what's the difference?
Right. Yes.
And is it a problem? Have you ever known what anything means? Really? I mean, if you're honest.
Not ultimately.
Yeah, really. And that's kind of a load off. You don't need to know.
Yeah.
And here you are, and you're enjoying the moment, and you're hanging out, and you're got a smile playing across your face, and hey, that's all right,
Thank you.
Hi, Peter. So I was watching a program with Gary Snyder, and he was, at the end, he said there was too many people on the planet, not enough animals, and not enough trees, which I sort of knew. And then, they had that shooting in Oakland, and then I thought about that study where they had put all those rats in the cage, and the strongest ones pushed all the weaker rats away, and this and that, and then at the very end, to make a long story short, they even died. And
sounds very familiar so far.
And so then I thought, well, should I start wringing my hands about this situation, or should I just try to, think that, God's doing its thing, and it's none of my business, it's God's business, and whatever happens, happens.
I mean, what good is it going to do you to do otherwise?
Well, yeah.
Oh, I have to fix this.
Yeah.
Hey, good luck with that.
But how about at least conceptually?
Look at it this way: if the problem is that there's too many people, if people start killing other people with wild abandon, that's directly addressing that problem. So there's the solution. Could work out very nicely. Everyone's going to die anyway, so what difference does it die whether you get killed in some massacre or you die of cancer or whatever? Who cares?
Yeah. Okay, well, just how about the last part, this God's business? So I just let him take over and just...
Well, has he ever not taken over? Are you going to relinquish your almighty control of the nuances of reality and positioning every quark exactly where you put it? And that's, okay, God, you take over now. I've done my share.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask another one. So, the Earth in position to the Sun is just, if we were any closer, we would burn up, and if we were any farther away, everything would freeze to death. So do you think that that's just luck, or do you think that some kind of intelligent entity says, "No, man, I want to get it just right so we can play."
Well, what does luck mean? What does intelligent entity mean? You know, this system is the way it is, and there is intelligence, manifestly. There is coincidence, manifestly. There is functionality of aspects of the system working together with various degrees of consonance or dissonance, manifestly. Is that luck? Is that intelligent design? Is it, who can say? But clearly the system is inconceivably intricate, and clearly it's also inconceivably functional. I mean, the fact that the Earth is at the right distance for life, and the fact that life evolves with such inconceivable functionality and detail. I mean, look at a human biosystem. I mean, it's incredible. It's an incredible machine. I mean, it's stupefying. No one could design a human body. I mean, it's talk about high tech. Jesus Christ. And so all of this is demonstrably happening, and it's obviously being done by this system. So whether or not it's luck or the will of God or then some supreme intelligence or the roll of the dice of some transdimensional aliens, is kind of like debating how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. The reality is itself. The reality speaks for itself, and you can't get to the bottom of what anything is or how it is anyway. So I mean, you can't pin down what is luck, what is coincidence, what is intelligence, what is intelligent design or something. I mean, all of these things they sound great, and they seem, if you don't look too closely, they seem to sort of define something. But then you look more closely, and it's like they're just these cloudy, amorphous, you can't find what's there, they're mirages. I mean, you could say, yeah, it is luck. Yeah, it's the will of God. Yeah, it's intelligent design. Yeah, it's transdimensional aliens playing their version of chess. And what's the difference? What's the difference? It is what it is, and there's no way to say what that is or how it is. It can't be done. And that is the fact, and that fact is a pretty full fact. I mean, that's a pretty juicy fact. It's got a lot of meat on it. You can get a lot of mileage out of that fact. So I'd recommend playing with that rather than this trying to play this interpretation off versus that interpretation.
Yeah. I read this thing by Ajahn Chah. He says if you go to a clear forest pool, many exotic animals will come and drink. And the other day I was sitting there, and these two birds were like just, and they were like they were going 90 miles an hour or something, and they came from nowhere and went to nowhere. And I thought that's just as good as a clear forest pool,
Someone asked, is everything you've said tonight true?
None of it's true. Because what is true cannot be said. On the other hand, everything I said tonight is truth. It's not true, but it is truth. Because words, ideas, communication, language, intelligence are all inconceivable, and they're all actual. And actuality equals reality equals truth. But don't sit at home and puzzle over this stuff. That's not the point. The point isn't to figure it out. The point is to notice how beyond being able to figure out it is. I mean, if I try to do anything with all this talk, it's to show you how inconceivable and insurmountable all of these pedestrian approaches to reality piecemeal and trying to sort it out and trying to piece it out and trying to work out some equation that has some solution is. It can't be done. Just give up. Give it up. all of this logic and this figuring is just completely fruitless. It can bear no result. It can bring you to no resolution or fruit. But it turns out you don't need that, because this is already complete. This is already resolved. The finish line is already the case. The end, the result of the equation is already the case. The fact that you can't figure out the equation doesn't matter. You've got the result, so who gives a shit what the equation is? You've got the solution. Who gives a shit what the problem is?
Just reminds me of that line. So it works very well in practice, but not all that well in theory.
That's the human situation in a nutshell. We trip over our own theories, and that's what causes us all our pain and confusion. The practice of life is very simple. You try and find food, try and find shelter, try and find whatever you seem to be attracted to, and what happens, and it's all out of your control. Right? That's pretty straightforward and very obvious.
Isn't logic a necessary part of life? Sure, we can go on, but logic makes life worth something, no?
Logic exists, but what logic is not logical. It's not logical to have logic. Logic doesn't exist because it's logical for it to be there. Logic exists spontaneously and irrationally as a functioning of our intelligence, which is not a logical thing. So whether or not logic makes anything meaningful or valuable, I don't know. Nothing about reality is logical, and all value is in reality. So logic could be said to exist within reality, but logic isn't really logical, so logic isn't really logic. So it kind of defeats itself by its very nature.
What about the internet? Do you feel that it's helping people live more in the here and now rather than older media forms like TV and newspaper and magazines, etc.?
No, not more or less. It's just another mode of experiencing which can be as easily correctly or incorrectly interpreted as any other. In other words, internet can be a basis for delusion or realization just as much as any mode of experience. And it's kind of like what I was talking about a little earlier with spiritual practice. It'd be nice to have this fantasy that there's some practice, there's some magic practice out there, and if you just do that, then you're going to get, the goodies. And it's not like that. Any experience whatsoever can be a vehicle for spiritual realization. And that very same experience can be a vehicle for confusion, delusion, pain, and suffering. It's not about what the activity is or what the practice is or what the path is. It's about what you do with it. And it's all about just simply seeing what things actually are. It's that simple. When you see what the internet actually is, then it's a vehicle for realization. When you see what going to the bathroom actually is, it's a vehicle for realization. When you see what sitting and meditating is, it's a vehicle for realization. When you see what eating is, it's a vehicle for realization. It doesn't matter. The activity, it's not about the activity. Activities aren't special. Activities are just an expression of reality. And if you see that, that's realization. If you get confused and trip over your own theory and fantasies, then that's delusion. It's not about any particular medium or activity or mode of experience.
Could you explain again why logic is not logical?
Logic is not logic because it's being done by the irrational. Consciousness didn't decide and logically figure out that it would be logical to have logic. Logic evolved irrationally from illogic. So it's actually irrationality that is doing logic most fundamentally.
Well, what are we saying logic is here?
I'm sorry?
What are we saying logic is?
Well, that's your problem to define. You brought up that issue. However you want to define it, the same thing obtains. I mean, I think of logic as the assertion that the relationship between elements can be known. In other words, you can say, A plus B equals or doesn't equal C, and that's a knowable or at least an addressable idea. And in reality, I say, you can't even know if there is an A, let alone what it is. You can't know if there is a B, let alone what it is. You cannot know what the relationship, if any, between the A and the B, if they exist, is. And you certainly can't know whether or not they equal C, if it exists, and whether or not equality exists or not. Because none of those conditions are actually definable. Because nothing in reality is definable. Hence, nothing in reality is logical. I think logic rests upon definability, as I understand it. And if you have a different theory of logic, then that's fine. But I think a similar argument would probably obtain.
I'd say that to think you are logical when you don't really know if you're logical is actually the real problem, because you're getting into a tautological argument. Is that right?
Sure. Fine with me. I mean, to think that you're logical is not very logical. So I mean, I would say human beings and reality itself are fundamentally completely irrational and illogical and unanalyzable realities. So you're starting from a system that is intrinsically not logical. So if you think you are logical, how did the logic get bootstrapped in there? Where did it come from? To generate logic out of irrationality would be a trick. It's sort of like the fundamental spiritual solution, as I put it, which is to generate limitation out of unlimitedness would be a trick. And all of our spiritual problems consist of thinking that we're limited. And in actuality, limitedness does not actually exist. So this limitedness that you think you may have, is being made out of unlimitedness? How does that work? It can't. And when simply seeing that fact, you are liberated. On that argument, logic is the basis. Is what the spiritual conundrum is based on, and the solution to it is illogic.
Well, that's their question. Isn't logic the idea of thinking that logic is irrational?
Isn't logic the idea of thinking that logic is irrational? I don't know. You can say that. I think most logicians would probably
not
disagree.
agree with it.
And they would have a lot of logical arguments why they did. On the other hand, Gödel's incompleteness theorem, I think, kind of uses logic to prove the fact that it can't exist. So that's kind of an interesting exercise.
So I may be kind of sloppy about how I put this, but we'll go for it. So I've heard a lot of different spiritual teachers say a lot of different things about, and even people who I would say have actually seen something. I mean, actually.
Yeah.
And yet they also make assertions, well, I meditated for a lot of years, let's say as an example, or I was totally devoted to my guru, or, there's lots of different ways of putting it. But they also did a whole bunch of other things before that. So how can you point to one thing and say, that was it? It seems to me kind of weak.
I agree completely. And it begs the question that cause and effect exist in a simple sense in this spiritual context, which I would argue with. In other words, the idea that if you do something, something will follow. And I think that experience is intrinsically nonlinear, and that the flow of events is intrinsically nonlinear, in such that kind of simple analysis just doesn't hold water. Assuming that, and this is a big assumption, assuming that your state of affairs is shaped by your past, there's no reason to suppose that there's any portion of your past whatsoever that's excluded from that shaping. So, and the way that works and the proportion that works and all of that is subject to theories, all of which are going to be, basically hot air. So you basically you can't know. You can say that, you can describe, it may or may not be useful or interesting to describe these things in a loose kind of way. I can say, well, yeah, it happens that I did do what I thought was as meditating for a certain period of time, for X period of time a day. But you can say those kinds of things, but they don't necessarily or let's put it, the interpretation of what that means is kind of up for grabs and begging the question. I mean, from my perspective, to weigh in as someone who may or may not have seen something and may or may not be a spiritual teacher, from my perspective, what this is all about consists of essentially seeing what this is, which can happen at any time with or without preparation, because this is what it is already, inalienably, always has been, always will be, and it's being seen by the individual already, always has been, always will be, so it can be noticed and appreciated at any given instant with or without preparation. So to suppose that certain chains of events or behaviors or something have to have preceded that seeing, I would refute entirely. I would say they may have or they may not have, but there's no way to assess the relevance of that, or not. So, but if my perspective on it is useful, I would concentrate more on the seeing in real time and less on worrying about behaviors, such as meditating or not meditating or taking drugs or not taking drugs or being moral or not being moral or whatever. And then maybe that direct focus may bring into perspective what, if anything, is required to facilitate it.
I would say possibly the first real glimpse that I got of what I would refer to as reality, what preceded that was a lot of stupidity, of not paying attention what was going on around me, of, not real bright moves. And yet that occurred anyway.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you can always say that seeing is preceded by not seeing. So in that case, the path to seeing consists of not seeing. So everyone's smack in the middle of the path. Everyone's right on course. If you're clueless, you're right there. You're in the homing pattern. I mean, it's all very strange. It's all this whole, seeing versus not seeing thing, realizing versus not realizing, it's very strange and very non-linear and irrational and blah, blah, blah. So it's not really susceptible to a lot of logical analysis. I mean, obviously all sorts of people have put forth all sorts of theories and all that about all of this, what's really going on here and how to facilitate it and so on. But as far as I can see, it's inscrutable, strange, very weird, and that's probably, if anything, the thing that makes it most elusive, is people expect it to make more sense than it does. When you get that it doesn't make sense, then that might arguably make it easier for you to stumble onto it, because you'll stop trying to make sense, which actually can increase your efficiency enormously. Making sense is a big energy suck. Believe me. Less Einstein and more Marx Brothers. And it happens to be quitting time. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and good night to our friends online. And have a lovely time until you stop having a lovely time, and then start again as soon as you can. By the way, if you'd like to stick around for a little while, we're going to have some snacks and some drinks, just a little social get-together, and feel free to participate if you'd enjoy that. Very loose and informal.